The journey begins at the narrow gate. The journey, Jesus beckons me to roam. The journey, where the path is straight. The journey that takes me home. The journey takes me home.
Well, good morning. Welcome here to the journey. Yes, something's a little different with this journey. I'm not Michelle. So Michelle was not able to do the journey this month, so I said I would step in and do the journey. The second thing that's different in the journey is I have no one in the studio with me. It's going to be a little bit of a different journey today. But before we begin that journey, I just really do want to thank Michelle for her leadership with the journey. She is just the right person to do the journey. I love the passion she has and brings to it. The fun that she brings to it. So, Michelle, thank you for doing the journey. I know that, life gets busy, and I get that too. So I'm glad to step in. I'm glad to cover for you. And folks, maybe would you just let Michelle know that you appreciate her. That you appreciate her doing the journey. You appreciate all that she does for the church. Michelle really does have a desire to see Christ be proclaimed and people grow in Christ, and she gives her time and talents and all that she has, she gives to God for that. So we're grateful for Michelle. Well, today's journey, it's really going to be a journey with the church, about the church. That's why there's no one in the studio. We could have had a little church puppet or something, and I could have interviewed the church. But really, I want to talk about our journey as a church, because we have a journey. You realize that we're in our 20s now. Our church is in our 20s. We've journeyed from infancy to the elementary years, junior high, teen years, and now we're beginning our 20s. And in every season of life, even for churches, there are different needs. There are different, just different requirements. Life changes. It changes for you and I. It changes for a church. We sometimes and often believe that our church is going to be our church that remembered in 1960 is going to be the same in 2060. But God forbid that would ever be the case, because that would be a sign of a dead church. Churches are on journeys. And just as you're on a journey and I'm on a journey with Christ, Christ speaks into our lives and challenges us and shapes us and changes us and forges us, so he does with the church. And so we're on a journey with the church. I'm enjoying this journey. I want you to know that. I'm thankful for many of the people part of this journey. I'm thankful for our governing board. I'm thankful for the folks on the governing board who have said, I'm available for God to be used in this capacity. I feel a call that God has to say, hey, would you take that position? And I'm so thankful that they have. Our journey has brought us to a whole different organizational structure, a whole different organizational way of making decisions and approaching decisions. It's more process-oriented than people-oriented. So we have these processes now of how leadership functions and how we receive people into leadership and really train people into leadership. I'm thankful for the way our governing board responds. I really like the word governing board rather than executive board that it used to be. Governing board really says what we do. We're not executives, we're those who govern, who oversee, who are charged with making decisions. And I love the folks that are on there. If you were to come to a governing board, you would find a peaceful, fun, the banter. It's just a really unified, wonderful, spirit-filled meeting. We have a lot of decisions to make. We have a lot of items that come our way, but it's easy. Not easy in the sense of we don't think it through or have tough decisions, but easy in the sense that we're all there for the same purpose as seeing Christ glorified, for the same reason of wanting to lift him up so others see him. And all of our decisions are run through, does this glorify Christ? Does this lift him up? How does this affect us as a body? And so I'm just really thankful for them. I'm thankful for an elder team. We have an elder team. We've had them for 2 years now, going on 2.5. And I'm just thankful for a group of folks that again are willing to say, God, I will be used in this capacity. It means I have a little bit more responsibility. It means I need to learn a few more things. I need to depend more on God. But they're great folks who help shepherd the church. They help us focus on the spiritual well-being and on the spiritual life. One of the great things is Ron's desire to get together and start some more prayer times. I love the Friday prayer time. That Friday prayer time, folks, you are so faithful, and I'm grateful for that. I love the fact that I know every Friday morning there's a group of people praying. And I love the fact that every Tuesday morning there's a group of people praying. And we could do that for every day of the week. And maybe in our journey, one day we get there. Maybe that's something that God is going to shape us in our journey to be have more prayer times. But I like the direction we're going. I love the unity that exists in the church. I love the unity that happens among the staff. If you walk into the church office, one of the feelings that you'll get if you're discerning that is one of unity, one of glad to be there, one of service, one of knowing that Christ is the head of the church and wanting to serve him and keep him as the head of the church and help people grow. So I'm just so thankful for all of that that's shaping up and taking place and how God has put us together. Obviously in our journey we've had some, as everybody's journey, we have these high points or low points, but they're significant points. And I look back on our journey, and I've been here almost 4 years now. So for me, it's only a 4-year journey. For some of you, it's more, some it's less. But this pandemic is part of our journey. It's not separate from it. It's not ruined it. It's not stopped it. It is just part of it. It's part of the fabric of who we are and who we're becoming. And I'm thankful to God for how he's weaving the pandemic into the life of the church. We've gone a year now, almost a year. I think it was the end of March, the last Sunday in March in 2020 was when we suspended services for a while. And we've been a pandemic church since then. But that's part of who we are. It hasn't stopped us. It hasn't ruined anything. In fact, I think that part of our journey has really opened up so many more opportunities for us. I know that sounds odd, but but it really has. Because I think God has stepped into our world, thankfully stepped into our world as churches particularly, and really caused us to say, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What do we need to continue to do? What should we no longer do? For me personally, the pandemic, even before the pandemic, I was thinking about, what am I doing in life? And what's important in life? And what should I be giving my best energy and resources to? And then a pandemic comes along and you really begin to think about what's the meaning of life in some senses? What's the meaning of my life particularly? Why am I made the way I'm made, gifted the way I'm gifted, given talents, abilities, health, and wealth that I have? Why is it like that? And therefore, what does God want to do with it all? And for me, I guess the phrase that I have begun to use as I worked all that through is, how do I make the maximum impact for God? What are the activities I do? What are the places I go? How do I, with my life, with all that God has given me, how do I make maximum impact for God? Because the reality is I only have so many years to live. I only have so many years in which I can be used of God. And I don't know how long that will be. Hopefully it will be a good many more. I always tell people I want to be 120. And I know some of you are laughing, saying, no, you don't. And maybe I don't, but I'll deal with that when I get to be 110, hopefully. But I want every year of my life to make maximum impact for God. And how do I do that? And how is He going to use me for that? And my eyes are open, my ears are open to hear God say, do this. I'm at work over here. Join me because this is where I'm going to use you for maximum impact. And I think that really is something our church needs to ask. Not only each of us individually, how do I make a maximum impact for God in my life? Or how does God use my life for maximum impact for Him? But we need to ask that as a church. The church is a body. The church is a living, breathing organism. It's not just an organization. It's an organism. It's a body. It's living. It's breathing. Christ is the head of this body who's alive and living and breathing and moving the parts around and telling us what to do. And so He knows us as a church body. He knows our gifts, our talents, our health, our wealth, all of our abilities we have. He knows that because He's purposely put us all together. Because He's building us together into a church. I love 1 Peter talks about we're being built together as a holy dwelling, a royal priesthood, a holy temple in which God dwells. We're being built together. And so we really need to think through, how do we as a church make maximum impact for Christ? So I think it's a good thing that it's something good that God has done for us through the pandemic, because it makes us stop and say, who are we? We've been really forced to stop everything we've done. And maybe some of these things we're supposed to stop, but we wouldn't have done that on our own because, let's face it, we as human beings are highly tied to tradition and history. And to stop something we were doing willingly somehow means like maybe I'm not being faithful to what was in the past and we should keep doing it even though it's not making a maximum impact, but it's just what we do. Well, it's not just what we do. What we do is determined not by what we did or what we've planned to do, but what we do is determined by what God says we do. Because God is always at work around us. And God has prepared us to step into the works that He's prepared for us to do. He's prepared the works, He's prepared us as a church. And through this, it's given us a lot of time to just say, what are we to do? we're going to be entering into the, at least, I don't know, sometime soon, within this year anyway, a post-pandemic, at least a post-crisis pandemic world. We'll be moving out of the crisis stage. There'll still be other stages of this pandemic, but I think we're going to be moving out of the crisis stage. And so for us as a church, we're going to be thinking, we already are thinking, we've met as a governing board, as an elder team together, and we begin saying to each other, who are we as a church? What has God gifted us to do particularly well? How do we see God at work, and where is He calling us to join in that work? What is women's ministry going to look like? What is men's ministry going to look like? Are we even going to have it? Those are questions we need to ask. They're fair questions. I mean, I just heard all of you through the camera say, what? But I get that. But we have to be honest before God and say, who are we? And what do we do? How do we make maximum impact for God? And that's really where we're headed. Is we really, in our journey, we're at the stage of saying, how do we make maximum impact for God? What do ministries look like? Which ones do we start that we've never thought about before, but all of a sudden it's in front of us and we have an opportunity? Which ones do we never ever go back to? Even though they were great in the past, but God's just saying, that's not for you anymore. Yeah, you can do it and it'd be a good work, and people will say, yep, that's some good stuff, but does that make maximum impact for God? And that's the journey we're on. We're on this journey of who are we? What are the gifts, talents, abilities, health, wealth that God has given us as a church? And how do we follow God in those? So I'm actually excited about that. I really think that's a good thing. I remember getting an email during the pandemic and saying, hey, sorry, I think because of the pandemic we can't do this ministry that we used to do, and I know that's probably disappointing to you. And I actually responded and said, I'm glad for that. It was a great thing we did, but it's good. It's good that God has said, I'm going to stop things so you can focus, so you can organize, so you can understand who I am, says God, so you know what I'm calling you to do. And so our church life is not about following the traditional calendar. Well, this happens at this month, and this happens at that month, and this happens at this month. And every year we just put it on our calendar and we do it because we do it. But we have such a wonderful opportunity in front of us to say, God, we have a blank calendar. Who are we and what do you want us to do? What are the ministries that you're going to open up that we've never thought about? Or maybe we have thought about them, but we just haven't had time and space and people to do them. So in our journey, we're looking at that. The doors are wide open. And I'd love for you to help us with that. We are, as a governing board, as an elder team, going to be coming up with a survey, 1-2 questions, maybe more. I don't know. I'm not making it up. I'm not in charge of that part of it. But it's just going to say, help us in this journey. Help us in our journey forward. Who do you think we are as a church? What are your ideas? What are your dreams for this church? What do you envision the church looking like, doing, being? How do you see God using us for maximum impact for His kingdom? And we want you to be part of that. And so that'll be coming, and you will have that opportunity. So begin praying, saying, God, how do we make maximum impact in the world through our church? We're going to ground it all in prayer, root it all in prayer. Prayer is spiritual warfare. In our journey, we have to know that we are spiritual warriors. We cannot go through a journey successfully as a church, as individuals, as disciples of Christ, without knowing that we're in a war. We don't often think of it that way, but Satan is always roaming around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Peter tells us that in his first letter, chapter 5, verse 8. He's seeking to destroy, to deceive, to ruin, to wreck. And so we're going to come up with a foundational prayer that helps us focus on the fact that we're in a spiritual war. And our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the powers, principalities of the air. Ephesians 6 tells us that, 10 through 18. And Paul says, you know, we battle in the heavenly realms. We're battling spiritual battles. And so we need spiritual armor. And he gives us the pieces of that armor in Ephesians 6. The belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, the shoes of the gospel of peace, and the sword of the Spirit. And he follows it up and says, pray always in the Spirit, because prayer is part of our armor. And that's what helps us in this journey. So you're going to see a prayer based on 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, in which Paul prays specifically. It's a prayer that Paul says, Thessalonian people, join me in this prayer. Disciples of Christ, join me in this prayer. If you've watched Fireside Fellowship just Thursday, a couple of days ago, that was the topic. It was Paul's prayer in 2 Thessalonians 3, 1 through 5. And it's a spiritual warfare prayer. It's a prayer that says, look, we need to pray for the success, for the triumph of the gospel, for the glorification of the gospel in people's lives. We need to specifically be praying for that. We need to, however we do that, write down names of people, places where we seek the gospel to run freely through their people's hearts and towns and countries, and that as it runs freely through their people respond, and the gospel triumphs in their lives over sin and Satan and self. Paul says, I want you to pray against those who are trying to stop the running of the gospel. I want you to pray against those who are wicked and harmful and evil, against those who are part of Satan's team to stop the gospel. And then he says, not only pray against those who are trying to stop the gospel, but pray for the strengthening of the saints. So pray that the gospel will run freely and be glorified. Pray against those who are trying to stop that, and pray for the strengthening of the church. That the church would, through God's faithfulness to us, that the church would make maximum impact for the gospel. That's where I see our journey going, is making maximum impact for God. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know the ministries we end up doing. I don't know all of that. But I do know that that's our calling. I do know that we are called to be, the church is called to be the pillar and foundation of truth. 1 Timothy 3:15 tells us that we are the pillar and foundation of truth. We as the church know the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by him. That's the foundational truth of life. That's the gospel that needs to run freely, that according to Acts 4:12, there's no other name given among men by which you must be saved, but Jesus only. That's what we pray for, triumphs in people's lives, the salvation message, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so, in our journey, we're moving in those directions. We want to be the pillar and foundation of truth. We want Christ to be the head of the church and stay as the head of the church. We know that Jesus has said that he is going to protect his church. And he is going to bring his church victorious. And not even the gates of hell will prevail against the church. See, Jesus, in that statement, knew that Satan is always seeking to destroy the church. But God is always seeking to give victory to the church. And God's power is far more powerful, far more effective than any power against him. And I love the fact that in our journey, we know how this ends. We know that in our journey, we don't have to wonder, man, are we going to overcome? Is this going to happen? But we know that we have everlasting life. We know that the church will be raptured. We know that the church will rule the world with Christ when he comes. We know that we gain the victory. You know, even in 2 Thessalonians, when Paul is speaking to the Thessalonians in chapter 2, and he's talking about the coming of the Antichrist, and he'll come in Satan's power and in Satan's way, and he'll deceive, and he'll do all these things. But Paul says, but God will crush him. But Jesus will come and destroy him with the word of his mouth. And that's what Revelation says. That Jesus comes with the sword of the Spirit, the double-edged sword out of his mouth, and with a word, he destroys Satan and all of his hordes that are against the church. So I love the fact that we know the end of the journey. We don't have to be scared. We don't have to be beaten down. We don't have to hide. We don't have to just be really subdued. We're not a subdued church. We're never called to be a subdued church. We're called to have a spirit of boldness, not a spirit of timidity. Now, Paul writes that to Timothy. He says, the spirit that is in us is not a spirit of timidity. It's not a spirit that's timid, that shrinks back, that's shy, that's afraid. But we have a spirit of power and boldness. And we have the Spirit of Christ in us, so that we can proclaim the gospel and partner in the gospel. And so our journey is focused on the gospel. It's focused on promoting it and praying for it and partnering with it and proclaiming it. That's who we are. That's part of our journey. The hard part of this journey is that we live in this world. And I can only really speak for America, maybe Canada, North America. But we live in this world that more and more the world is, I think, following Satan more than they're following God. The world has no desire to follow God. The world is separate from God. And the church is supposed to be separate from the world. The church, the word in Greek is ecclesia. It means called out ones, separated ones. Holy means separate, completely other. So we're the church, or we're called out people. We're called out from the world, the way we used to live in sin and selfishness and through Satan's power. And we're called into holiness, into God's kingdom, in which we live by his Spirit, in which we live holy lives, upright lives, dealing quickly with sin because we want to follow Jesus and we want to promote him. And so we're called out from the world. We live in this world that, the more we're called out, the more we're going to notice it. One of the things that I do now is I believe to make maximum impact for God in my life. I have begun to be part of a school, a college that trains people who want to become pastors. They're called into pastoral ministry. And I love doing that. I teach them theology. I teach them how to read the Bible, how to interpret the Bible, hermeneutics it's called. I teach them preaching. I teach them how to put together sermons and how to teach the Bible and all that. And I love doing that. And one of the reasons I love doing that is because of what I gain from it, what it benefits me in terms of helping me grow. And one of the students, as they were preaching, made a great comment, and that I wrote down, and I thought I've got to say something about this comment. But he was preaching about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how Nebuchadnezzar set up this idol, and when they played the music, they were supposed to bow down. And he said there were about 4,600 people there, and all 4,600 bowed down except 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you could just see the picture of everybody bowing down on their knees, head on the ground. They're bowing down, and you look over the crowd, and it's pretty easy to pick out the 3 that are still standing. Like, what are those guys doing? Who are they? Why are they standing? Didn't they hear the music? Are they deaf? Didn't they not get it? What was the deal? And his comment was, my student's comment was, they would have stuck out like sore thumbs. And that just resonated with me. That as the world follows Satan more and more and gets more, there's more wickedness and more evil that people begin following. Christ followers, disciples of Christ, who are called out of the world and into Christ, we stick out like sore thumbs. We're supposed to. We're salt and light. In a dark world, light shines, and the darker it gets, the brighter the light is. The more decaying the meat is, the more needed the salt is. And we stick out like sore thumbs. The problem that the church has had in the church journey, the church in general journey, is that the church has not wanted to. The church has decided to join the world. And that's wrong. We're never called to join the world. We're called to be in the world, but not of the world. We're called to be peacemakers. We're called to be salt. We're called to be light. We're called to be those who make a difference in people's lives. We're called to promote the gospel. We're called to bring salvation to people, but we're never called to be like the world. We're never called to say, hey, do what the world does, look like the world, act like the world, speak like the world, do whatever the world does, don't worry about it, you'll have salvation anyway. That's not the message. The message is, I've called you out of the world into his kingdom. Because we're supposed to stick out like sore thumbs. We're supposed to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're supposed to be the ones who say, it doesn't matter how many idols you want us to bow down to. It doesn't matter what you will do to us if we don't bow down to your idol. But for us, we have no choice but to serve Jehovah God. Because we know he is the only God. We know that Jesus is the only Savior, that he's the only truth, that he's the only life, that he's the only way to salvation and everlasting life. We have no choice. There's no choice for us but to follow him. Unfortunately, the world at one point, or the church at one point, made a choice to begin following the world. I have a poem. It's a rather long poem, so I want to read this to you. But it's a poem that was written, oh golly, I can't remember when, 1800s. So there's some ancient language in here, so just bear with me. But it was written in the 1800s. And it's entitled, The Church Walking with the World. The church and the world walked far apart on the changing shores of time. The world was singing a giddy song, and the church a hymn sublime. Come, give me your hand, said the merry world, and walk with me this way. But the good church hid her snowy hands and solemnly answered, nay. I will not give you my hand at all, and I will not walk with you. Your way is the way that leads to death. Your words are all untrue. Nay, walk with me but a little space, said the world with a kindly air. The road I walk is a pleasant road, and the sun shines always there. Your path is thorny and rough and rude, but mine is broad and plain. My way is paved with flowers and dew, yours with tears and pain. The sky to me is always blue. No want, no toil I know. The sky above you is always dark. Your lot is a lot of woe. There's room enough for you and me to travel side by side. Half shyly, the church approached the world and gave him her hand of snow. And the old world grasped it and walked along, saying in accents low, your dress is too simple to please my taste. Yeah, I give you pearls to wear, rich velvets and silks for your gracely form, and diamonds to deck your hair. The church looked down at her plain white robes, and then at the dazzling world, and blushed as she saw his handsome lip with the smile contemptuous curled. I will change my dress for a costlier one, said the church with a smile of grace. Then her pure white garments drifted away, and the world gave in their place beautiful satins and shining silks, roses and gems and costly pearls, while over her forehead her bright hair fell crisped in 1,000 curls. Your house is too plain, said the proud old world. I'll build you one like mine, with walls of marble and towers of gold and furniture ever so fine. So he built her a costly and beautiful house, most splendid it was to behold. Her sons and her beautiful daughters dwelt there, gleaming in purple and gold. Rich fairs and shows in the halls were held, and the world and his children were there. Laughter and music and feasts were heard in the place that was meant for prayer. There were cushioned seats for the rich and the gay to sit in their pomp and pride, but the poor who were clad in shabby array sat meekly down outside. You give too much to the poor, said the world, far more than you ought to do. If they are in need of shelter and food, why need it trouble you? Go, take your money and buy rich robes, buy horses and carriages fine, buy pearls and jewels and dainty food, buy the rarest and costliest wine. My children, they dote on all these things, and if you were their love to win, you must do as they do and walk in the ways that they are walking in. So the poor were turned from her door in scorn, and she heard not the orphan's cry. But she drew her beautiful robes aside, and as the widows went weeping by. Then the sons of the world and the sons of the church walked closely hand and heart, and only the Master who knoweth all could tell them all apart. Then the church sat down at her ease and said, I am rich, and my goods increase. I have need of nothing, and ought to do but to laugh and dance and feast. The sly world heard, and he laughed in his sleeve, and mockingly said aside, the church is fallen, the beautiful church, and her shame is her boast and her pride. The angel drew near to the mercy seat and whispered in sighs her name. Then the loud anthems of rapture were hushed, and heads were covered with shame. A voice was heard at last by the church from him who sat on the throne. I know thy works, and how thou hast said, I am rich, and hast not known that thou art naked, poor, and blind, and wretched before my face. Therefore from my presence cast I thee out, and blot thy name from its place. Folks, our journey, we don't want our journey to end that way. We don't want to be like the world, because we're not called to be like the world. In our journey, it's time that we understood who we are. We are the bride of Christ. We are a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We are being built together as a temple to glorify Jesus. We are not like the world. We should not strive to be like the world. We are called out. We are separated ones. We are holy people. That's where we're headed on our journey. Our journey is to promote Christ. It's to tell people about who Jesus is. It's to walk in his ways. It is to wholeheartedly embrace the gospel. Let me put it this way. We are to wholeheartedly embrace the whole gospel for the whole world. That's our journey. To wholeheartedly embrace the whole gospel for the whole world. That's what we're called to do as a church. That's the journey we're on. Join us in the journey. It's going to be a great ride. It's a journey that ends in glory. It's a journey that ends in eternal life. It's a journey that's going to be tough along the way. It's a journey that's going to include suffering and strife, and it's going to be hard. But it's a journey that ends in victory. It's a journey that, though it cost us our very life, it gains us his life. And so that's our journey. It's not about us. It's not about our life. It's about his life. It's about Jesus. That's our journey. Well, thanks for listening to me this morning. Thanks for being part of this show, The Journey. Thank you for being part of the journey of the church. And I look forward to journeying with you this year as we really understand who we are, who God has called us to be, where he's at work, and how we're going to join him. May you be blessed by God as you understand who you are before him, as you journey with him, and as you join the journey of the church. Amen.
The journey begins at the narrow gate. The journey, Jesus beckons me to roam. The journey, with path is straight. The journey takes me home. The journey takes me home.